Yo, what's up guys? Video today on attack and crit damage. So how much attack is actually worth how much crit damage? And at what point should you be focusing more on crit damage rather than how much attack? So first of all, a rule that is definitely set in there that 8% attack is equal to 7% crit damage. That is just a simple rule by the fact of how much crit damage do you get for a full roll? That is a 7. How much attack do you get for a full roll? That is just a simple rule stated in the game. Max roll of crit damage is a 7. Max roll of attack is an 8. So we're going to be basing off those numbers if it's more interesting to roll higher on crit damage or to roll higher on attack. We can therefore also claim that a 13 attack is equal to a 10 crit damage. But technically not really, because if you have a spot for a gem, let's take the argument of this rune over here. If I want to get the most amount of damage out of it, how much attack can I put to a maximum grind? Or how much crit damage can I put to a maximum grind and gem? Well, the other way around. Well, that would be a trade-off of a 23 against a 10. So that is definitely one that I'm pretty sure crit damage is going to lose. But we're gonna take like by how far of a lose that is. But something else we can actually check is 70 flat attack equal to 10 crit damage or not. Depends on the unit most likely, but let's see about that. Just to put it in there, gems and grinds, what would be better? 10 crit damage or going for flat attack? Well, first of all, this is a little bit of a difficult topic because every unit has a different amount of attack. We work with different stats, we work with different bases, we work with different multipliers, and a whole bunch. Plus, we work with artifacts that add in more difficulty to it itself. So we're going to be using a tool to determine how much a Lucian can hit without artifacts, and we're just going to look at the base without artifacts first. If the tool is sound and does give the right results, then we can use the tool to also just put the artifacts in there and then still go back and forth on checking how much anything is. Well, the tool will in this case be a copy of the Lucian card damage calculator that Spoon_Dagger made a pretty while ago. If you want to use this, I'll leave a link in the description. Don't go and try to edit things in here, but follow this where you first make a copy. It's in Dutch, but you make a copy, you load it to your own Google Drive, and then you can actually use that. So first of all, let's get some Lucian stats in here, and let's see how much damage we actually do. So we're going to be looking at just this. I will outspeed though, so I can guarantee hit that. I don't have any fight sets whatsoever right now, and we're going to be removing the artifacts just to make the calculations a little bit easier in the first place, just to see if it does work. So we're looking at a close to 2300. I'll put those numbers in a second. But let's see how much damage we would do with this kind of Lucian at this moment. So let's boost up that Lucian. We do have some shield sets that we first have to break. So we look at the later hits coming in. And then we're looking at about 13k, 1337 over here. Do like that number. But 13200 to 13700 is about the numbers that we do see. Now let's actually put those Lucian stats in this calculator. That does seem about right here for the attack buff. We do get about like 13.7. So this is more of the higher end rather than the low end. I didn't add any of the other numbers in here. So this is definitely a sound number that we can work with, that we do know that the Lucian actually does do that much damage if we add this in. So first of all, we're going to be testing without artifacts how much attack is a crit damage. It of course depends. If you have very high attack, then you need more crit damage. If you have very high crit damage, then you need more attack. It's something that's kind of in a scale that you have to be even on. But from the numbers that I have right now, let's say how much damage increase do we have for 10 extra crit damage and how much damage increase do we have for 100 extra attack. So this is the baseline. But now we're going to be adding a 8% attack, or we're going to be adding a 7% crit damage. But then again, attack and crit damage is kind of something that is in a scale. If you have super high attack but not that much crit damage, your multiplier is not that high. But if you have very high crit damage but not that much attack, your input number is not that high and your multiplier therefore is also not that great. So it's always a little bit of a balancing between both to make it better. But from the stats that I have, let's see if I get more value from 8% attack, or do I get more value from 7% crit damage? First, of course, we got to calculate how much is it actually to get a 8% of attack. What's a 900? So that's definitely an easy number right there, which would be a 72. Okay, now let's add those numbers up. So base, let's also put in the damage. Attack is a 2297. CD is a 217. Just to get all of those numbers in at the first place. Okay, adding in 72 extra attack would make it that we do this amount of damage, which is a plus 247 this on damage. Is it still readable? That's almost readable. Now it is readable. Yes, sir. Okay, let's remove that once again. And let's put back, or let's give the crit damage a 1-up. How much do we have for crit damage? This is actually the point where crit damage is taking less. So with this calculation, we can see that actually the crit damage 7 is giving a whole portion bit less damage. But then again, in this example, I do have a lot of crit damage, not that much attack. But let's make that a 1-to-1 trade. If we did take the 246 and we divide it by the 72 and then we do it, let's say around 60, that's where we get the number of this. So that would mean that therefore that about 60 flat attack does mean 7 crit damage. Another meaning about 7% attack, a little bit less than 7% attack would be equal to 7 crit damage. So 1-to-1 trade, or even attack is having a slightly upper hand in that. But let's actually, for the sake of it, kind of revert those numbers where we have it the opposite way. So let's still take the base of these just for the simple copying. Let's take a different style where we don't have as much crit damage. So let's say 200 crit damage, but we're working with like 3000 attack. So a lot more attack. We're still actually, well, I did not really check if this was about the same damage, but apparently we're looking at nearly the same damage over here. So we're looking at a 3000 over here and we're looking at a 2000 over there. Let's once again increase the attack by a 8%. So therefore we go for this over here. We only get a very small improvement. As you can see, in this case, it's only 128 improvement, which is definitely a lot less than we saw with the previous iteration. But now let's actually do that for crit damage. Let's add in the crit damage to a 207. Pretty much a similar style, actually. Well, we pretty much flipped the script right now. In this case, we do have like a 270 damage increase over here and a 226 in here. And in this case, we have 227 damage over here and a 228 damage over here. So that does simply mean that you do want to get both. There is not one better than the other, but you kind of want to get the fine line where pretty much they have an equal improvement on both of them. This is also the point where I definitely could have done this better in Excel and then actually get like some proper numbers without me having to guess. But then again, we're already on this, so let me just do the guessing part. I'll catch you guys up again once I have a number where crit damage is pretty much to the equal value of an attack. Okay, so I did a few more iterations, and this is actually where we have a point where the crit damage is almost worth as much as the attack for the improvement of both giving one full roll. So that therefore does mean, but only means on illusion, because then again, it does really depend on what unit do you give the attack to, because some units just have higher attack scaling than others. But for the case of illusion, we have a 230 crit damage is equal to a 2700 attack, which is also interestingly enough a exact 300% attack on the illusion in this case. So that does also mean that about every crit damage is worth a 11.7 attack in flat, which does also go back towards our first assumption that we made. How much flat attack is worth crit damage? Well, if you go for a 10 crit damage, and you times that, of course, by the 11.7, you would get a 117. So therefore, a crit damage is always higher than a flat. In the case of this, of course, by a really long shot, 23% attack is going to be way more. So we have a base attack on the illusion of 900. We would give that 23% attack, which is a lot of attack. That's a 207. 207 attack versus the 10 crit damage, which was equal once again times that 111. So that is a big difference of this over here, where CD is giving that much value and attack is giving that much value. So therefore, of course, attack has a way higher value by a long shot. Even if you get towards like just a 15 roll, you're probably already better than the crit damage roll itself. And that is a maxed out crit damage roll in that case. Bunch of full information. TLDR, what did we learn today? Well, first of all, first thing we learned is that a crit damage roll is higher than a flat attack roll. However, you have to keep in mind for certain units as a Soniat, you do care more about that flat attack, and therefore flat attack will have higher value. But that's only if you have equal ground between your attack and crit damage if it's already in balance. Another thing we can learn is when is your crit damage off balance and in what balance? And how far is that off balance? So we can make a few ideas behind this. So your multiplier that you kind of want to be aiming for is the 11.7. Okay, I wrote down things a little bit easier. So this is about the multiplier that you're aiming for, the 11.7. The moment that you're below that, you're going to be having too much crit damage. The moment you're above that, you're going to be having too much attack. As you can see with the numbers here. So actually, let's get back to my normal Lucian. So the Lucian that I have right now is a 2295 over a 271, which is definitely a multiplier that is below. However, we actually have to do it properly where you do put the artifacts in, so you would be looking more at this. Which does mean that I'm still below that, and I'd rather up attack in the current state of my Lucian than up crit damage. However, that is also not the true fair statement, because this Lucian in normal state does actually have good artifacts. Because technically we could add the extra crit damage from the 3 in here, maybe half this one, and the crit damage here, and then like half those two both. But we also have attack increasing effect. And that is kind of the point where it gets like more and more complicated and more difficult. But I think a thing that we can learn from this is, if we just divide the attack over the crit damage, you want to be looking at a multiplier that is sitting close towards 11, and that is the point that you want to be sitting at. If you're lower than that, you want to up your attack. If you're higher than that, you want to up your crit damage. And I think that's just the main thing that we can learn from this. Of course, for every unit, it's going to be slightly different because of different multipliers, different base attacks, different everything, different artifacts, a whole bunch of that. But if you kind of just want to have a rough idea of saying like, hey, am I working with too much crit damage or am I working with too much attack? Maybe the 11 multiplier, I wouldn't even put the 0.7 in it. Just the 11 multiplier can maybe help you out a little bit as well. However, you have to keep in mind certain units do also scale, such as a Luna from enemy max HP. And with that max HP, you do, of course, do more damage on crit damage. What does the 11.7 multiplier actually mean? For every 1 crit damage, you want to have about 11.7 attack. That is as simple as it is for this one. I'm not going to make it too difficult with like all kinds of artifacts kind of things in as well. I think the video is already pretty lengthy to just get to this answer. 1 crit damage on a Lucian is equal to 11.7 attack in about a fair treatment of 1 because in the end, it still is like the scaling up and that kind of stuff. So in the end, TLDR, for every 1 crit damage you want to have about an 11.7 attack on a Lucian, but only on a Lucian because of the attack scaling that he has. But also you have to keep in mind artifacts do make it a little difficult as well. So therefore there's just a whole bunch of this. Also, for this Lucian, for example, I rather would add more attack than adding more crit damage if I do want to do more damage. But that's only if we keep in mind excluding the artifacts. With including the artifacts, the attack increasing effect, the additional damage by attack, the crit damage 3. There's so many arguments that you can make like, oh, one is stacking more than the other. I would just relatively keep it simple. If you are, once again, below this number, up your attack. If you're above this number, up your crit damage. So you can definitely make it as difficult as you want, but just simply keep it easy. If you divide your attack over your crit damage and you're below the number of 11.7, up your attack. If you're above this number, then up your crit damage. Simple as that. Let's keep that as a TLDR. Hope you did enjoy this one. A little bit more of math stuff that I probably messed up somewhere along the lines as well, because I like to mess up my math from time to time. Let me know in the comments if you have any other ideas for math, whatever related videos, or maybe you already figured something out that you want to put in the comments to share with the other people. Feel free to do so. I might make a video on that in the future as well. This was a request from a few people that just saying like, okay, how much crit damage or attack should I be focusing on? Both, as much as possible, in most cases. But the equal ground is 1 is 11. Kind of ish, I guess. Well, guys, thanks a lot for watching for this one. And see you as always in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you would like to see more guides, join the Discord and check out the content tab for the guide video archive, which contains all of the guides that you might need. Hope to see you there.